Okay, so let's start class. I'm going to review very quickly what we did last class. So last class, we learned about monotheism, which is the idea of one true God. And as I said last class, this marked an intellectual revolution in human history. And from monotheism, we developed three new ideas, which are money, individual, and the nation state. It's important to note that these ideas have always existed in human history, but with monotheism, these ideas became the dominant paradigms. And together, they will give us modernity and create the world that we live in today. Okay, so that's what we discussed last class. And remember, last class, we also discussed that this created a lot of problems for us. There are a lot of benefits, but there are also a lot of consequences. Okay, so we're going to continue the story of humanity today. And today, I want to focus on a very specific question. Why do societies rise and why do they fall? Okay, and I know that these first few classes may seem abstract and theoretical, but that's because we're developing the analytical models in order to better understand our world. So as we move on, we'll start looking at very concrete examples. But for the first few classes, please be patient. We are going to develop the theory to understand the world. All right? So let's discuss societies, why they rise, and why they decline. Now, unfortunately, we live in a world in decline. So there are lots of signs that the world is in decline. What are these signs? Shout out some signs.
Wars.
Yeah, very good, okay? So you have conflict and wars. You look at the situation in Ukraine, look at the situation in the Middle East. But also, you may have seen the news and you have seen conflicts arising in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Myanmar. Also, Trump is about to send US troops to Mexico and Venezuela. Okay, so we live in a world of conflict. And that tells us that the world is in decline. What are some other signs?
Environmental issues.
Good, yes. So you have climate change. Okay, we are putting too much pressure on the environment, so the air, the water, the land is becoming much more toxic. Okay, good. What else?
Employment rate.
Good, yes. Unemployment is going up. But not only that, but people's attitude towards work is declining. We live in an age when people don't take work that seriously. People are not as enthusiastic. They're not as motivated to work hard as before. And we call this in China the Bailan age, right? The age of Bailan, meaning let it rot. Like, who cares? Don't take things too seriously. In America, the term is called quiet quitting. Okay, you pretend to work, but you're not really working. What are some other signs? So also you have lower birth rate. And this is a very important sign, right? Because if you think about it, if young people refuse to get married and have babies, eventually the world is going to die off, right? So this is actually a very important sign that the world is in decline. And we're seeing this happen throughout the entire world in all societies. The only exception is Israel and Georgia, but these are very small, rare cases. For most societies, there's rapid decline in birth rate. What are some other signs? Okay, you see a lower standard of living. Okay? And all this means is that inflation, right? So people make less money and they can afford less. Prices go up, but people's wages go down. So that's another sign of decline. Okay? What are some other signs?
Health issues like diabetes or high blood pressure.
Okay, you also see higher stress, right? Higher stress, people feel more anxious, people feel more depressed, people feel more stressed. Emotionally, they feel drained. Okay, what else? Okay, people are less optimistic, right? Okay, greater pessimism. Okay, also, and this is really important, is the idea of debt, right? Both public and private. There are lots of governments around the world that are facing a fiscal crisis. A fiscal crisis just means that they spend more than they take in tax revenue. There are many families in China, in the United States, throughout the world that are heavily in debt. Okay, so debt is a huge issue for the world today. Also, lower cohesion and trust. And what this means is that people no longer trust each other as they did before. Society is less cohesive. If you walk on the street and you see a man on the street bleeding or hurt, you're less likely to help him. Okay, and this is very true not only in China, but also elsewhere as well. So lower trust issues. What are some other signs?
Disease.
Okay, greater disease, yeah. Okay, increase in disease. People are less healthy than before. People are more stressed than before. People are less optimistic. So we can go on and on and on because the signs of rapid social decline are too many. Now, these are signs of decline. Well, if we look at rise, then obviously it's the opposite, right? Yeah. People are much more willing to trust each other. Rather than going into debt, people will save money. People are healthier. People are much more optimistic. People are having lots and lots of babies, right? People are employed. Okay? So these are all signs that society is in decline. The rise, it's the opposite. Also, another sign of decline that's very important that doesn't really happen in China, but happens in the Western world is immigration. Okay? Immigration. Immigration is a huge issue in the Western world, and we will discuss immigration in future classes. But immigration is a sign of decline because it reduces cohesion. Okay? And it also reduces the standard of living. Okay? Another sign of decline is also housing prices go up. So people can no longer afford to buy a house. This is true in China. Young people can no longer afford to buy a house, but it's also true throughout the world. Okay? It's really hard for young people to get by. Okay? All right. Also, fiscal crisis, right? We talked about this, but the idea of fiscal crisis is the government cannot afford a lot of public expenditures. In the future, maybe 5-10 years from now, pension will be a huge problem for governments. Okay? So these are all signs of rapid decline. All right, now having done this, what I'm going to do now is go over some theories as to why this is happening. Why is the world in decline? Okay? And there are lots and lots of theories, but I will present 3 theories to you that I think are interesting. Okay? The first is the idea of financialization. And this theory is proposed by an economist, a French economist named Thomas Piketty. Piketty, okay? And he wrote a book called Capital in the 21st century. It is a fantastic book. You don't have to read the book, but if you have a chance, you should definitely pick it up because it is a very easy but very illuminating read. And what he argues is that what happens in society is that capitalism transitions from phase to phase to phase. In the beginning, you have consumer capitalism, meaning that what the society is trying to do is create goods that consumers want to buy. This is an era of rapid wealth generation. Then you move into financial capitalism, which is a period of investment. Rather than build factories, you put the money into the stock market. Okay? So you're trying to generate as much money as possible. But what we discussed last class that's very important is wealth and money are not the same thing. So in the first phase, consumer capitalism, you focus on the generation of wealth. In financial capitalism, you focus on the generation of money. And then you move on to monopoly capitalism, which is where just a few companies control everything. And we live in an era of monopoly capitalism. And this happens because it is much more profitable for companies to be monopolies than to be in competition with each other. Financial capitalism is looking to create as much money as possible, not as much wealth. And so a few companies come to dominate, become monopolies. And that's the age we live in today. Okay? Now, why is this important? It's important because when we make this transition, people are no longer focused on working hard. They're only focused on speculating. All right? So let me give you an example. Let's just say I'm an entrepreneur and I want to make as much money as possible. Well, what I do is I build a factory. When I build a factory, I'm creating real wealth because a factory requires you to hire workers. It requires you to build technology. It requires you to build goods that people want to buy. But after I build a factory and I make a lot of money, I want to take this money and let it grow as fast as possible, so I put it in a stock market. Okay? And that's just how people behave. The problem is that if too many people do that, then no one's really working. No one's creating real wealth in the economy. The other problem is that because of the way capitalism is set up, if everyone's putting the money in the stock market grows too fast. And the real economy does not grow that fast. Okay? And the difference is stark. Thomas Piketty spent a lot of time going over income tax, just looking at how much tax people paid. He did a lot of statistical analysis. And what he discovered is the real economy in late stage capitalism will grow about 2%. The financial economy will grow at 5%. Okay? And this is really key. What this is telling us is that if you have $1 million, you could choose to go and open a restaurant, or you could choose to invest in the stock market. If you open a restaurant, you will make at most $20,000 a year. But if you were to put in the stock market, you would make $50,000 a year. So everyone's going to put all the money in the stock market, which allows for the stock market to increase. But the real economy is not improving. And therefore, you have all these issues arise. Greater unemployment, greater debt. No one's really working. Okay? So that's the idea of financialization. And what Piketty argues is that this is just a natural cycle. This is just a natural byproduct of capitalism. We live in an age of late stage capitalism. Is this clear to you guys? Any questions before I move on to the second theory? All right, let's move on to the second theory called elite overproduction. And this was proposed by a historian named Peter Turchin. And Peter Turchin spent decades looking at why societies rise and fall. He looked at the Roman Empire. He looked at the French Revolution. He looked at many different examples. And what he believed is societies fall, decline, collapse because of the idea of elite overproduction, meaning you have too many powerful people competing for limited positions of power. All right? So to understand this, I'm going to talk about another experiment called rat utopia. And rat utopia was a series of experiments conducted by an American scientist named James B. Calhoun. And what James Calhoun was trying to do in his experiments was trying to figure out what living in a world of abundance and wealth and security meant. After World War II, the world was divided between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was the Cold War. But it was also a time of increasing abundance due to technology and peace. And the population was increasing. So James Calhoun conducted these experiments to figure out what this meant for the world. So what he did was this. He had a room, okay, that was sealed off from the world. And in the room, he put in food and water and housing for a colony of rats. Maybe like 10 rats at first, but they quickly became 400, 500 rats. And at first, the rats were really happy. But no matter how Calhoun configured the experiment, ultimately, the rats always ended up killing each other. Okay? So what he discovered is, if you live in a world of abundance and security, the end result is the rats always kill each other. And he kept on doing this for 20 years. And he could never, ever create a situation in which the rats lived peacefully. And he could never figure out why this was the case. And even today, there's a huge debate as to why this is the case. But he had a theory, okay? And the theory is this. The rats were not competing for food. They were really competing for status. All right. So let's think of this, okay? In a state of nature, in the real world, rats compete each other for mating rights, right? So you see a beautiful rat and you fight over her, right? The rat who wins out is now the alpha male. And the alpha male can have as many female companions as he wants. Okay? And what do the other rats do? In nature, what will the other rats do?
Fight against them.
Well, the other rats will probably run away, go somewhere else, and find other female companions, right? Because everyone's trying to be the alpha male. But what's the problem with James Calhoun's experiment? Why do they fight each other? there's no place for them to go. They're stuck where they are. You understand? So status is what we call a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. Okay? There can only be one winner. But in nature, if I win, then the other rats run away and try to build their own colony. But in James Calhoun's experiment, there's no place for them to go. And so all that happens is they keep on fighting each other until they die. Okay? And that's the idea of elite overproduction. And that's what Peter Turchin says. The elite, the children of the elite, are always fighting for positions of power. Not normal people, it's the children of the elite. But eventually, the elite have too many children, and there are not enough positions of power. Okay? Another way of saying this is that in China today, there are too many graduates of Peking University, Beida, and Tsinghua University, Tsinghua, right? They want to be the big boss. They want to have the power, but there's too many of them. Okay? There's no place for them to go. And that leads to conflict in society. And ultimately, what Peter Turchin has discovered is, if that's the case, then elite overproduction will ultimately lead to either war or revolution. It will lead to the collapse of society. And there's no way around this. Okay? That's Peter Turchin. Now I want to go to the third theory. And the third theory is the idea of a civilizational life cycle. And this is proposed by a German philosopher, scholar named Oswald Spengler. And what he argues is that society, culture, civilization, it's no different from a person. As a person, as a human being, we go through a life cycle. We are born, we grow up, we mature, then we die. Right? And there's no way around this. We all have limited life cycles. You can live to 100, you can live to 150, but eventually you'll die. And what also Spengler says is that happens in society as well. And there's nothing anyone can do about this. So let's go over the life cycle for civilization, okay? In the beginning, you are in the village. Then you move to the town. Then you move to the city. Then you develop the megacity. Okay? Not all civilizations will go through the cycle, but the successful ones will go through the cycle. Okay? You start off, so the Romans, right? The Qing dynasty. You start off in a village, then if you're successful in the village, you build a town, then when you're in a town, and you're successful, you defeat other towns and you build a city, and you become a megacity. Okay? And what Oswald Spengler says is, at the height of the civilization must now die. Okay? So let's go over the theory. Well, in the village, life is pretty simple. People work hard. Okay? They are united. They have a collective mentality. Everyone's helping each other. And also, what's really important is lots of babies, right? It's very common for mothers to give birth to 10, 11 kids in a village, right? And the reason why is kids are free labor. So you're incentivized to have as many children as possible. Okay, so this is the framework of a village. But as you go up the civilization ladder, as you mature as a civilization, what happens is you have increased abstraction. Abstraction is just a fancy word for you're removed from reality. Okay? So when you're in a village, you understand everything, right? You understand, oh, the food that I eat comes from the seeds I implant, right? But when you're in a city, guess what? That those drinks you're drinking